The problem isn't just who's injured. It's who's left to carry this when the schedule starts tightening. Because when you look at the Toronto Blue Jays rotation right now, it's not even about raw talent. It's about depth, and more than anything, margin for error. And that margin right now basically doesn't exist. And then a name shows up that, to be honest, most fans weren't really tracking closely. Ryan Burgard. And before anyone shrugs it off because the name doesn't carry weight, hold on a second. Because this is exactly the kind of move that separates a team that reacts from one that anticipates problems. The situation is simple. The Blue Jays could, and probably should, still look to add another arm. This isn't a luxury. It's not just depth on paper. It's a real, season-long need. And the context helps. On the other side, the Kansas City Royals are in a strange spot. They have more options than roster spots, and that usually means one thing. Someone who should be on the main roster gets left out. Not because of performance, but because of internal competition. And that's where Burgard starts to make sense. He wasn't cut because he failed. He was cut because there wasn't room. And that completely changes the way you look at it. Because when a player loses a spot due to performance, that's one kind of risk. When he loses it due to context, that's another. And usually a smaller one. But there's one detail almost nobody is really talking about. His spring training numbers. A 7.24 ERA over 13.2 innings. And the reaction is automatic. That's not what we need right now. But is it really that simple? Because if you only look at that stretch, you ignore everything he did in 2025, and that's where he actually stood out. Consistency, ability to attack the zone, and more importantly, clear signs of development. Spring training can mislead, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad one. And this might be one of those cases where the number looks worse than the actual performance. Now, let's bring this back to Toronto. What does this team really need right now? Not just a name, not just someone to eat innings. They need someone who can come in without pressure and deliver stability. And Burgard fits that profile perfectly. Low cost, low external expectations, but with upside. But this is where things start to get complicated. Because betting on an under-the-radar arm looks great on paper, but in a competitive season, it turns into a tightrope. You can't miss twice in a row, and the Blue Jays' recent track record with marginal decisions hasn't exactly been reassuring. So the question becomes uncomfortable. Are you adding depth or trying to patch a bigger hole with a smaller solution? Because injuries in a rotation aren't fixed with just one name. And that's something fans at Rogers Center feel in real time. The pressure is there, and it's real. This roster was built to compete now. This isn't a rebuild. It's not an experiment. The window is open. And when you start relying on moves like this, quiet, almost invisible, it usually means something already slipped earlier. But there's another side to it, and this is the detail that changes everything. Truly competitive teams are built on moves like this. It's not just stars. It's not just blockbuster trades. It's about finding value where nobody's really looking. And the Royals, whether intentionally or not, created that opportunity. They built enough depth to leave a high-potential arm off the opening day roster. That doesn't happen often. And if Toronto can capitalize on that at a low cost, the risk starts to look acceptable. Now, let's talk fit. Because it's not just about bringing someone in, it has to make sense within what's already there. Burgard doesn't arrive as a savior. He comes in as a rotation piece, or even a flexible option, depending on how the staff wants to use him. And that has value, especially in a scenario where you need to manage workloads, protect arms, and avoid further injuries. He doesn't need to be dominant. He needs to be reliable. And right now, that might be even more important. But here's another question people don't really want to ask. If he's that interesting, why did Kansas City let him go? And the answer isn't comfortable. Because maybe they see limitations that don't show up in basic numbers. Maybe it's ceiling. Maybe it's inconsistent under pressure. Maybe it's something you don't see in the box score, but shows up every day behind the scenes. And when you bring in a player like that, you're betting your system can get more out of him than his previous one did. Development, fine-tuning, proper usage, and that puts direct responsibility on the Blue Jays coaching staff. It's not just about acquiring talent, it's about turning that talent into real production. Now, let's break it down, bluntly. What does Toronto gain? A low-cost arm with upside and no immediate pressure. What do they risk? Relying on someone who hasn't proven consistency at the highest level.
What does Kansas City lose? Depth, but not a critical piece. What do they keep? A more established structure ahead of him. And it all circles back to the same question. Does this move actually move the needle? Honest answer? On its own, no. But maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe his role is different. Hold the line while the main pieces get back in place. Prevent the team from collapsing during a rough stretch. Buy time. And in baseball, time is everything. But the Canadian fan base isn't thinking about time. They're thinking about October. They're thinking about the postseason. They're thinking about not reliving recent frustrations. And that's when any move that doesn't look big starts to raise doubts. But that's where evaluation can go wrong. Not every addition is meant to be a headline. Some are meant to prevent disaster. And sometimes that matters just as much. Now, hold on to this for a second. What if the real problem isn't who's coming in, but who can't stay healthy? Because if that's the case, no move really fixes it. And then any Burgard type move becomes just another patch. So in the end, this potential move isn't about hype. It's about a cold, honest read of the roster. Understanding where you can take risks and where you can't anymore. If the price is right, it makes sense. If it costs more than it should, it starts off wrong. Simple as that. Now, I want to hear from you. Is this smart depth or another sign this roster is more fragile than it looks?